Welcome to the Content Podcast, conversations with Silicon Valley's creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SVCREATES. This episode of the Content Magazine podcast is brought to you by Bonfire, a Silicon Valley digital agency building elevated websites for ambitious brands. Find out more about Bonfire at bonfire.com.
Hello.
Today we talk with Jeffrey Lowe. He's a Bay Area playwright and director, and is currently the Director of Community Partnerships and the Casting Director for TheatreWorks, Silicon Valley. Hey Jeffrey, this is Daniel. How are you doing?
Hey, good to hear from you.
Yeah, good to hear from you too. I just want to say that I don't know what it is. It may be just because you are just a lovable person, but and maybe it's because when we first did the story with you, it was like our fourth issue, and I met you. I think you had just received like the Art Council Emerging Artist Award and maybe some other awards. And I don't know. There's just something about you that I just love you. I just have a connection in my heart for you, and I don't even know why, because we haven't seen each other that much. But when I do see you around town, you just bring a smile to my face, and so I'm excited to be able to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. The feeling's mutual. I remember that moment too. Yeah, it was at the San Jose Museum of Modern Art, and I did receive the Arts Council Emerging Artist Award, as you said. And I
Yeah.
just remember you were taking photographs, and you came up to me after I said my thank yous, and you said you wanted to chat with me and do a piece about me in content, and it was. I don't know. It was like between the award and the article in content. It was really nice to be seen, and so I feel the same about you, Daniel. And I've loved
Yeah.
watching your work and content. And I'm glad to
Cool.
bring a
Well,
smile to your face.
yeah, awesome. Yeah, so that was back in 2012, and so since then, you have definitely been active. And there's a number of projects that you've been working on, directing and playwriting. But I really wanted to get one really crucial, probably the most important thing that maybe you can answer for me, as not necessarily in theater that much. I think it's a very important question. But why is it when you write a playwright, it's got the GHT in it, but if you say playwright, what's up with that? Do you know the history? I'm always confused.
Oh gosh, I have no idea. And also you'll notice, I work at TheatreWorks Silicon Valley, where we spelled theater with an R-E. And I
Right.
also work in San Jose, City Lights Theater Company, and I was talking to Lisa Millette, and she just reminded me that they spell theater with an E-R.
Right. I heard about that. It's two different things. Theater is, if I remember correct, theater with the R-E, the like English way, is the actual act of it, and the building is the ER. I guess
Ah, okay.
that's what I heard. But the
Okay.
playwright thing, I don't understand. Um, but more seriously, so you've been directing and then you're playwriting. Of those two, which would you say is more kind of like your heartbeat?
Oh, that's such a great question. And my answer is a little roundabout. So
Okay.
some people have asked me, if I could only do one thing in theater, which would it be? Would it be playwriting and directing? And I would say, gun to my head, I would be a playwright.
Yeah.
But I have had a lot more opportunities as a director. I would say I'm a much better director than I am a writer at the moment.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think I'm much better at it. I'm definitely more confident in directing than writing. And also, in some ways, I think I have more fun directing than writing, because writing is sort of an excruciating thing for most writers. But I could speak for myself. I find it excruciating and scary to write. And
Yeah.
directing, I sort of walk into it with a little bit more confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that? I mean, do you think that? They're definitely different because director is definitely the coach and the team builder and the direction, of course, in the name, builder. And so you have kind of already material and talented people that you collaborate with, right? But when
Yeah.
you're writing, it's just you and your imagination, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's spot on. I think for me, everybody treats their art form differently. Everyone writes differently. Everyone directs differently. And for me, the way that I approach directing, it's definitely exactly what you said. It's about being collaborating. It's about collaboration with other amazing artists.
Hmm.
And for me, I feel comfortable working with a team and trying to uplift voices and uplift other ideas. And for me, my most important goal in directing is to try to create an environment where every artist in the room can feel comfortable to make mistakes or to take their biggest swings or share their biggest ideas without fear of any repercussions, I guess, if they're wrong,
Yeah.
because in rehearsal, we're just trying to find the ideas that all work together and mesh together. And then in
Yeah.
playwriting, it's just me and my anxiety and my self doubt that I'm sitting with.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, there must be a little bit of insecurity, self doubt as you step into a directing position too. When there's, let's say, like there's 15 actors and you got a lighting and tech crew and you got props and everything, and everybody's like looking at you, going, "Okay, Jeffrey,
Mm.
what do we do?" I mean, how's that process?
A little bit, but I've sort of grown out of it for the most part.
Hmm.
I think that really early on in my career, I used to have. I think everyone has this. I used to have insecurity about, like, say, directing actors that were older than me.
Hmm.
That's something I've since gotten over. But I will say, and I shouldn't say I've fully gotten over it. I remember I'll share a story with you. One of my favorite shows that I've ever had the chance to direct was a show called The Language Archive that we did at TheatreWorks in the summer of 2019. It was the last show I got to direct at TheatreWorks before the pandemic. And in this cast was just it was a play that I had been desperate to direct since 2011. I'd been trying to get a theater to hire
Wow.
me to work on this play. So there was that part of that pressure. And then the cast was I was fortunate enough to have a cast full of artists that I had wanted to work with for a long time, artists
Hmm.
that I looked up to. There were two artists in particular, Francis Jew and Emily Kuroda, who are really just legends of the Asian American
Hmm.
theater community. And I
Hmm.
don't know how or why they decided they wanted to work with me, but they decided to do the show.
Yeah.
And I remember coming into the first day of rehearsal and seeing them, and I was going to direct them, and this was sort of the biggest budget that I was given the keys to,
Yeah.
and I wasn't nervous until 90 seconds before we were going to start rehearsal, where I saw everybody,
Oh.
and I
Oh.
kind of forgot how to direct a play right at that moment. And I looked at everybody, and usually you start a very specific way when you start a first rehearsal, but like I kind of just went, all right, everyone, do we just want to read the script? Which is not how you start a rehearsal, the first rehearsal. And
Oh.
Francis Drew, who is one of the most generous people in the world, and he's such a wonderful mentor to so many people. I think he saw what was happening to me as a young director,
Hmm.
and he
Hmm.
goes, he just goes, Jeffrey, before we get started, could you actually tell us why you wanted to do this show and why you love this show?
Oh.
And at that moment, I was like, one, I'm like, yeah, that's how this is supposed to go. This is how this is supposed to start.
Yeah.
And two, just seeing him be so generous and kind to me calmed me down. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I do know how to do this. I do know how to direct a play. We're gonna be fine.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that makes sense. So you start out kind of like as the director, in some ways, as you would for any kind of like collaboration, like casting the vision of, I
Hmm.
guess, what you like, what you see, and yeah. Then as a playwright, how does it feel? You've directed a lot of the things that you have written. Um,
Sometimes, yeah.
yeah, what's it like turning that work over to another director?
It's better that way, I think.
Yeah.
I think that for me as a director, when I approach a script, I get to look at it from various different angles, and I I get to sort of share my ideas or think of things in a way that the playwright might not necessarily have thought of. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for
Mm-hmm.
me as a playwright, when I love being able to bounce those ideas off with a director, because a lot of
Yeah.
times they'll be able to see the words that I wrote, and it's not like they're going to take it in a completely different direction, but they might approach it just a little bit differently in a way that's going
Hmm.
to be more powerful than I had imagined. Or
Yeah.
it's not, and we just have that discussion. It's good to just have someone to bounce ideas off of. I think the challenge for me sometimes when I'm writing and directing my own work is that I get more set in my
Yeah. Yeah.
ideas than I like to be when I'm
Sure.
collaborating. It's harder to collaborate when I'm wearing both hats at the same time.
Sure. Because there's probably such, you remembered or had a vision even when you first penned it. So then when you get the actors together, it kind of, yeah, it's almost like it's so codified, or I could see that being a difficult thing. Because I think even photography, where if I've over kind of like visualized what the concept of the shoot is, and then I show up, and a bunch of the elements just aren't there, or working out the way that I thought it would, or the even like the model, the subject doesn't, you know what I mean? And I have to change. Sometimes that's really difficult. So I could see that. Is there a time that you were a part of a production of one of your plays that you had written, and a director did something that just really blew you away? That was like, oh my gosh, that kind of expanded your own mind then as a playwright or
Mm,
even as a director.
you know, yeah, I think that there were moments, both with, there have been directors on my plays where what's been helpful is when directors have oftentimes found unhelpful patterns in my scripts that I don't notice because I just sit so
Hmm.
close with it.
Hmm.
Like I
Hmm.
remember there was one script of mine where Leslie Martinson, my mentor, she was directing the piece, and she goes, every scene ends and starts the same way. Someone
Oh.
leaves to go to bed, and someone wakes up in the morning to go to work. And I was like, oh, and that was because it was a piece that was really semi-autobiographical, and for me that was my memory of it. That's how that was what it was. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, but for a play that's not helpful, that's not
Yeah.
interesting structurally. So we looked at that. And then there was a play of mine called Waiting for Next that we're going to be doing at City Lights. We had a director who was working on the piece with me, and she sort of went and she said, I'm going to be, what did she say, I'm going to be not precious with these lines for a second and just know that I'm going to do this. And she just sort of she sat with me, and one by one she said, these are the moments that I don't think these people need to say out loud. These are the things they
Hmm.
don't need to say out loud. And it was a play
Wow.
about just two people that were talking a lot. And it was interesting when she went with it. And I didn't keep every single cut, but it was interesting to see how it might be more interesting to see them feel things more than they were speaking them. So it was just so
Yeah.
helpful where, sometimes as a writer, I'm like, I just need to write it all down, and I need other people to help me sort of then thin it out, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So then when you're directing, especially being a playwright, and the sacredness of the words in some ways that the writer has written, um, how then, if you were reading something, or putting together something, and there was some dialogue that you thought needed to be changed or edited or dropped, how do you approach that decision making? And I'm also curious, like, how much leeway do you actually have
Mm.
legally, even with scripts and stuff, to do that?
Yeah, it's all pretty dependent. So if you're working on a new work, like with the examples I gave you, I was the playwright in the room, and if the playwright's with you, you just have
Hmm.
discussions with the playwright and just present your ideas. And also, for me, I try to always put up front, like, this is your work and these are just my ideas, and if you say no, I'm going to do what you write as a script because it's your script.
Hmm.
um, if it's an established work where the playwright is not there, there's sort of one of two things. It could be a really old text that is in the public domain, like a Shakespeare or a
Yeah.
Greek play, and you just do whatever you want with those, really.
Just hack it up.
You just hack at it. That sounds crass, but it's what people do. They just do whatever they want. But you know, if you have something that still has like an estate, like an Arthur Miller play, an Edward Albee
Mm,
play, where you know those playwrights are no longer with us, August Wilson, but you wouldn't edit those pieces at all. Those pieces you
yeah.
just keep as they are. I mean, you could make a request to the estate or whoever holds the rights to them. Um, but a lot of times, if you have ideas like that to really alter a script,
Yeah.
um, you have to have that idea really early on, because that process of getting that approved will take a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah. Is there some sort of thing? I know this is kind of like true, like in, like the what do they call it? Like the intellectual property and stuff like that. Can you change maybe, one or two lines, but if you changed, like a certain percentage, then you would have to get it approved? Or you can say like, oh, you know what? We're going to cut this scene 2 lines early, or because of budget, time, production, you know what I mean? Or if you did something like that, like with Arthur Miller, is that just like completely not acceptable?
Yeah, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't,
Yeah.
especially the lines. Like you wouldn't ignore dialogue or try to cut dialogue. You know, purposefully, I should say. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
you know, theater being a live art form, sometimes the lines come out weird for an
Right.
actor, and you know that's just
Yeah.
human error. But yeah, I think anything like that you would want to get some approval. But if it's if it's minor stuff, you might get that approval from the estate.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Minor things.
Yeah. So then let's go then, because now that's the directing and the writing. Now let's move it to the actors, which you kind of brought up. So if you're directing or even in the room as the playwright when something's going on, and there's a happy accident of actor says something, so have you seen that kind of refining process that happens live? Um, I would think so, but talk about that with the actors actually bringing themselves to it.
Oh my gosh, the actors bringing something to a new script happens all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you know you'll be working on these readings of these plays, and an actor will say a line. You know, they'll sort of either rearrange or reword a sentence here and there that doesn't alter the meaning, but there's a reason why it came out of their mouth that way, and it's because it felt more natural. And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
like sometimes the director or the stage manager will be like, oh, by the way, here's a line note, you said this line wrong. And myself as a playwright, and I know many playwrights have done this before, I'm like, you know what, I like the way you said it better, I'm just going to change the script.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and then sometimes, you know, for me, when I'm doing early readings of my plays with actors, I'm like, if anything feels weird for you to say, please share. And then also, you know, in thinking of you know, having hearing everyone's voice in a room, and especially
Mm-hmm.
if you have a show where there are multiple communities or people of various identities um, portrayed in a play. You know, like for example, if I'm writing a play, I'm Filipino American. If I'm writing a play about Filipino American and African American relations,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, I'm going to want to make sure that I'm having a conversation with the African American artists in the room to be like, okay, well, I need to listen, and I need to know if this is feeling accurate, or if there are
Yeah.
any things that feel like they need to be altered. Please share that with me so I can make sure that I can do my best in the spirit of collaboration, in the spirit of authenticity of what we would do. You know, that's just an example. I
Yeah.
don't have a play like that, but I
Yeah.
think that's where the actors and directors, especially early on in the process, you know, that's where
Yeah.
they really come through, especially if you're creating a room, as I said before, where everyone feels welcome to bring their full selves and their full ideas to the table.
Yeah. 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 That's cool. Well, yeah. Let's transition then. So, being a Filipino American playwright, how would everybody talks about being a playwright or even a director or in theater, and giving opportunities for the stories that need to be told, told. So, from you as a playwright and even a director and working with a theater group, um, how does your personal Filipino experience come out in what you're doing and in your voice?
Yeah, it comes out both consciously and subconsciously, right? Like
Yeah.
that is a big part of who I am. That was a big part of my upbringing, right? My parents both came here from the Philippines, and they raised
Hmm.
me, and that was a part of who I was, and that was a part of what was around me,
Yeah.
um, growing up. Um, so sometimes, I'll have plays that I'll write that's directly about that experience, or I'll cast shows that might not necessarily have anything explicitly written about, you know, race or identity and that aspect of things. But if I cast, people that are Filipino American, we're going to bring that to the table, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I remember, going back to the language archive, I remember that play is about a linguist who studies dying languages. And in preparation for the show, I went to go visit my mom, and I just asked her. I found this list of the of maybe 20, I think it was like 20 of the most beautiful words in Filipino languages.
Oh, cool.
And I went to my mom to ask her if she could pronounce them for me. Now, me being the silly American that I am, didn't even put together that they weren't all in the same dialect, and my mom doesn't speak every Filipino dialect.
Right.
But she was helping me with some of them, and then there was a point where she just asked me, she's like, "Are you doing a Filipino play?" And I was like, not quite, but I'm Filipino, so I guess every play I do is Filipino."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I sort of feel that deeply, you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
that just because I might not be working on something that speaks directly to the Filipino American experience, say, I do bring myself to everything that I do artistically. So that's
Yeah.
gonna be there whether I intend to or not.
Hmm. Yeah. So what are some of those beautiful words that you kind of that resonated with you that you kind of remember can pull up?
Yeah, I might be mispronouncing some of these, but like, one of them was a word, harana,
Hmm.
and that one means the act of wooing someone
Oh, cool.
by serenading them.
Oh.
And I I was just I remember feeling so attached to, like, how specific that word was. It wasn't just the act of wooing someone, it was the act of wooing someone by serenading them, which felt
Yeah.
so wonderful.
Yeah.
There is, marahuyo, which means to be enchanted,
Oh, wow. That's
which felt
cool.
really cool, and then, let's see. Oh, this one's really funny that I actually knew this one beforehand. Gigil is a word that's a noun that is the uncontrollable urge to pinch or squeeze someone, which
Okay.
oftentimes they'll use that for, how they feel about, like, say, a baby.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
that's fun. That's fun. So there's funny thing too is I don't know if you researched this and for that, but were these beautiful words in the sense of the way that they sound or pronounce, or just the meaning behind them, or was it the combination of the two? Because to me, when I hear those, it's interesting. Those are very beautiful. All three of those are very beautiful in the concept, but is it
Mhm.
also the sound of it, or do you
I
remember
don't
anything about that?
know. They didn't really say, but in
Yeah,
that list, I think it was probably like a BuzzFeed article or something. But
yeah,
but I agree. I think that the sound of it. I mean, I'm mispronouncing them, I'm sure. So I wouldn't rate it on that. But I do think that, like,
yeah,
having just one word encompass
yeah,
such beautiful, vast concepts is a
yeah,
really cool thing.
yeah. That's cool. So, I mean, what would you say? I mean, this is, a difficult question to answer, but I would love to have your kind of senses. What would you say, or from your experience, what is the Filipino American ethos, or, how would you kind of describe it or define it?
Mm. Oh, that is hard. That is quite hard. And of course, it's different for everyone. But for me, I really see a group of people, Filipino-Americans that came here,
Mm-hmm.
I see a group of hardworking people.
Mm-hmm.
A
Yeah.
lot of people you'll see from the Philippines that immigrated here or are first, second, third generation. You'll see a lot of people who are doing work like obviously you'll see a lot of nurses, you'll see a lot of post office workers, you'll see a lot of naval officers, and
Mm-hmm.
just a lot of people who are just came to America like many immigrants with this idea that they can work hard and live a more comfortable life than
Mm-hmm.
they could in the Philippines. That's not, and that's of course, America is such a complicated place, and that's not true for everyone. But so many, I see so many Filipinos that are just here to be a part of this country's workforce, and they work really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. So I want to ask you a little bit about some of the projects. Back in the day, you started these the bench projects or
Yeah,
readings, right? And then also you've kind of started our digital stories or been involved with digital stories. It seems to me both of those are very much like providing, I guess, access
mm,
for stories and writers, playwrights to get works out there.
yeah.
Um, what what's the thinking behind those? Maybe if you can give a little brief history of both of those two different projects, and then and mix in there your thinking behind launching those.
Yeah. So yeah, both the bench project and our digital stories are things that are sort of linked, and our digital stories became a bit of the evolution of the bench project through the pandemic. Is
Yeah,
probably what it is.
yeah.
But the impetus for the bench project was a couple of things. Basically, what the bench project was an evening of short plays that were all set on a bench. Most people ask if there's a theme behind it, and there isn't. It was because what I owned for a set piece was a bench.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked various playwrights to write these short 10-minute plays sat on a bench with minimal tech and production needs. And we performed these pieces for charity. And in the early days of the bench project, what we would do is instead of charging ticket prices, we would have a different nonprofit partner organization, and we would choose an item that they needed, and you could donate the item rather than have to pay money for a ticket. So the very first bench project, what we partnered with a group called the East Bay Children's Book Project, and we just said, bring a used or new children's book, bring as many as you can, or even one is fine. And if you bring it in and you donate it, we had a box, you can then enjoy a night of theater. And for me, it was trying to combine access to storytelling in theater. Not everyone can afford a ticket to see theater,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and also using our art and storytelling as a community service. So I wanted to find other organizations that were doing work to help those in need, help our community. I've partnered with Sacred Heart. I've partnered with the Second Harvest Food Bank,
Mm-hmm.
and just find a way to really let our art be community based. And in addition to that, because these were short plays, because there was no red tape. It was all a volunteer project. It was also a way, sort of not on purpose, and then it became purposeful. It was a way for to give opportunities for emerging directors, emerging writers,
Yeah.
emerging actors to really get on stage, do their thing, tell their stories, and both hone their craft, get better at what they do. And then I know a lot of relationships artistically have been built from these
Mm-hmm.
bench projects. The other day, I was looking at the cast photo from the second bench project we did, which was maybe 2013, maybe. And it was so stunning to see on much larger stages than we did that bench project, which was like a 40-seat theater. How many of those people I have collaborated with still, and how many people collaborated after that, and how many people I met on that project.
Yeah. That's cool. It's kind of like you are the Judge Apatow of freaks and geeks of the Playwright.
A little
Well,
bit, right? A little bit.
yeah. So, yeah, that's cool. So then, it seems to me like the in the work, because even like if I remember your origin story, even when you were in high school, you kind of brought people together to kind of do a theater production of your own, and
Mm.
it seems to be kind of like this theme that you kind of then the bench project, and then of course with the pandemic, moving to the digital stories, our digital stories. Um, and even what you're going to be doing next with writing fragments home, that's going to be also for a charitable production. How did this giving back aspect, where did that come from, and how is that coming out of you with all these projects?
Oh, I don't know. That's an interesting question. You know, a part of me is like, I don't have a lot of artists in my family. Most of my family are, I have a lot of people like in medicine. I have a lot of people working in, electronics and different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's always been important for me as a person to make sure I'm contributing in a positive way, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Not that I plan on leaving this world anytime soon, hopefully, but I want to leave this world better than I came into it,
mm-hmm.
and for me, like, yes, of course, I think that representation matters. I of course fully believe that telling stories on stage and in other mediums is a way that I'm able to help build empathy in the
Mm-hmm.
world. And I think that, sometimes I get to do shows where I'm sharing stories and parts of history that are undertold and need to be told more. I think all of that is true. And
Yeah,
also, I think that, it's important for us as artists to think of additional ways to support our community that is like tangible is not the right word, but is a little bit more concrete, right?
yeah, mm-hmm.
Um, I think that it's all like, I don't want to diminish the beauty of just doing the art. I think that
Right,
it's true. I think it's powerful. I think that it's worthwhile. But I also think it shouldn't get in the way of us also thinking of like, how can we serve our community? How can we do a charitable event? How can we do educational work? How can we do those things that will also affect our community in other ways, in addition to sharing
yeah,
these stories?
yeah. It's interesting. I would think that specifically storytelling, and theater and even film, that the writers, I guess there's two ways that you're coming from an angst or a frustration, or you're coming from this, uh, like a humanitarian, like,
Mm,
I mean, yeah, I don't even know if I'm able to say it, but I would think that, you have to study people in order to think of dialogue, right? You listen to people probably, right, when they're talking, like,
mm,
oh, that's interesting. And I think that must give you a kind of un a subconscious stewardship of humanity in a way. Do you think that that's kind of underneath there somewhere? I don't know. I mean, there's no question there, but just we're dialoguing. What do you think?
yeah, I mean, when done right, well, some people will say I shouldn't say when done right. Like this is like a blanket
Right.
statement, but
Yeah.
oftentimes it's really beautiful when art gets to be, the phrase that we all hear a lot. Art gets to be a mirror to society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think art helps us process what we're going through as people. Like, I think that once we're out of this pandemic, it's going to be really interesting to see the art that comes out of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember, I forget, I was listening to some podcast about movies and television, and someone was reflecting on whether or not this was going to be, post pandemic was going to be similar, but they were saying how long it was either a direct theme or um, a sort of character trait where it's like, oh, this person's a Vietnam vet, or this person is coming
Yeah.
out of the political turmoil of the
Yeah.
Vietnam War. Like that's a big theme, and it's people trying to wrestle with that or figure out what that is. Like, are we
Yeah.
gonna, after 2020 and a good portion of 2021, we are
Right.
going to have to that's going to be a part of who we are as people, that we went through this.
Yeah.
And it's not even just the pandemic, it's everything that happened over the past 14, 15 months, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be really interesting to see how art helps us process and acknowledge what has happened.
Yeah. Yeah. So for you, I mean, what do you think are what makes for a good story and a good play? What are some of the
Hmm.
key elements, even as you're writing? I mean, now they've kind of, definitely more experience in the medium. And so when you sit down to write something, what's kind of like some key things that, okay, I got to remember to include some sort of A, B, and C,
Yeah, I don't know that I try to mess around with structure as much as
Mm-hmm.
I can. Not there are people who do it more than me, but I do try to mess around with it. So I don't know if there's like an A B C
Mm-hmm.
that I go with, but I will say that, like, I try to really think about, why do we care?
Hmm. Yeah.
This might go back to me doing sort of the community service stuff, right? Where I'm
Yeah.
like, why do I
Yeah.
need to do this? I think that, I don't
So
ever
you're
want to
really
be.
trying to so you're really just trying to justify by your what you want to say in the story by doing the charity events. No, no.
Yeah, I'm just like, what? This is self indulgent, but at least we're doing this for charity. No,
Right, right. Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
but when I'm writing, I try not to be self indulgent, right?
Yeah.
And it's, for me, it's never enough for me to be like, I care about this, so I'm gonna assume everyone cares about this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be
Yeah.
like, I'm not necessarily gonna say what am I trying to say, but it's like, what is my perspective? What is the question I am asking? What am I trying to
Hmm.
explore? And does it
Yeah.
matter? Do we care?
Hmm.
you know, because there's, you'll look at a lot of plays that have not aged well, not necessarily because there's things problematic about it, although there's certainly those plays, but there's some plays where it's like 30 years later, it's like, oh, we thought that was so interesting then, but now we don't really care.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I'm not trying to write plays that, I'm not writing plays to be Shakespeare. I'm not trying to be like, oh, I better write a play that's going to be good for 200 years or whatever. But I'm also not trying to write a play that I'm doing a play for the sake of doing a play.
Yeah. That's interesting. So just even thinking about like this last year with the pandemic and the shutdown and stuff like that, and I know you had and it wasn't the end of the world, but I do know that you wrote spending the end of the world on OK Cupid, which was somewhat of a end of the world kind of
Hmm.
theme. Um,
I should
I was
say it's
yeah.
spending the end of the world on OK slash or space Cupid, because the actual website OK Cupid doesn't have a space, and if I didn't put a space there,
Oh,
I
that's
got a
right.
cease and desist letter.
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember talking to you about that. Yeah, because you had the OK Cupid in the title. Yeah,
Oh
that they didn't
boy,
want to be yeah, that's fun. Oh well,
it was
that's a
funny.
yeah, that's a whole other topic, huh? But yeah, I wanted to ask just so looking kind of at the theme of the end of the world and relationships and how people spin that kind of like idea of finality, and then this last year, um, what has that kind of how would that have changed what you wrote in some ways, and then
Mm.
how are you looking at the world and the end of the world now?
Well, it's interesting because the play was about a lot of different forms of sort of loneliness.
Mm.
It was
Mm-hmm.
like loneliness, and also like trying to figure out if you were going to, the beginning of the play, half of the world just disappears, and the
Yeah.
other half of the world has to sort of reckon with that, the fact that they were still around. Um, and so it was a play about loneliness, and also a play about trying to like navigate, like, if I am here, if I am going through this life, how am I supposed to do it? What is the best way to
mm,
go about this?
mm,
And it'd be, exploring themes of loneliness and melancholy, which certainly, for whatever reason, I end up doing in my work regardless. I think that thinking of loneliness and isolation is going to feel very differently in this
mm,
pandemic
mm,
world. You
mhm.
know,
Yeah.
um, if nothing else, for the themes that I already like to explore, it gives me an easy setting for a lot of, like, well, why is this person alone? Like, well, we're in the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. So you'd say, I mean, what are some of the themes that you kind of tend to explore? So you mentioned kind of like loneliness, but what's some of the other themes you are toying with?
Yeah, I do explore a lot of, I do a lot of pieces about sort of growing up, coming of age, sort of discovering yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that for me, it's really important for me as a person to think of, always growing, always learning. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of times I try to explore that in my place, where it's like no one's ever a finished product, right?
Yeah.
I try to explore redemption. People who do things that they're not proud of, things that audiences might not be comfortable with, or we all think are wrong, and how can they like, still be good people? How can they recover,
Mm-hmm.
redeem themselves? How can they change?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and of course, I like to, I explore what it is to be, yeah, I explore a lot of family dynamics, especially, immigrant to American born
Mm-hmm.
parent-child relations. That's something that I find, I explore a lot, and I'm really interested in sort of telling those stories, especially, in the question of why do we care. I mean, those
Mm-hmm.
are stories of, so much of the population are the child of immigrants. So many people are the child of immigrants in this country, and
Yeah.
it's astonishingly few how often those stories are told on stage, film, television, or anything in a good way, or in an
Yeah.
authentic way.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you separate the over autobiographical information that gets into the work? Like how I'm always fascinated about that. How do you go beyond yourself?
My mind is always, when I'm writing, my mind is always the starting point, and then I just sort of let the story find itself. A lot of times I'll start with a beginning and an ending of a play, and I have to figure out how to get there, or how we want to
Mm-hmm.
get there. Or I'll,
Mm-hmm.
with my director brain, a lot of times I'll have an image in my mind. It's like, how do I make that image happen through my writing?
Yeah.
Um, but with that, yeah, a lot of times a little bit of autobiographical stuff will come in here or there, or stories I hear, or people that I know, or things like will sort of creep in.
Yeah.
But it's not that hard to let the characters then take over and
Yeah.
let them do their own thing. You know, I'll a lot of times I'll joke around with folks where I've had a play that is pretty autobiographical, and then a lot of people will think that it's 100% true, and, like, it's not 100%
Right.
true. Like
Yep.
like the main character's father is dead. My dad is in the audience right now.
Yeah.
Like, you
Right.
know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
step one. Like,
Yeah.
obviously we took license to, like, there are things that'll resonate, and then there are things where we just, we're telling stories, and we're going in different directions for the sake of exploring different themes.
Yeah. Oh, so okay then. So in you have a production of Writing Fragments Home that's going to be coming up in June, right?
Hmm.
Um, and in that's a story of a young Filipino artist, right, who is struggling with kind of like his heritage to overcome writer's block and
Yeah,
discover his voice.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Are
yeah.
you in there anywhere?
Yeah, and what's interesting is, like, the scenario itself isn't really autobiographical, but really that piece is really based on, it's inspired by my relationships with
Mm,
people. Like, my
mm-hmm.
relationship with my mother, for example. that character's mother is they're really both the main characters of this play, and sort of her navigating America and him navigating America. Her
Yeah.
being, coming from the Philippines and him being born there, but them both having to experience America in a very different way than people that look different than them, or have different backgrounds than them.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are parts of it where, like, we'll have, like, family members of mine will have a laugh at some of the lines, and there are other things that are
Oh yeah.
entirely fictional.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Did you ever work at Barnes and Noble by any chance?
No, I always thought that I wanted to work at a bookstore, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I
What do
I always think
you?
I'd love it.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you? What's for you? What's some of the stuff that you have read that really kind of like you think shaped you in your writing
Mm.
mind?
Well, that would go to a lot of plays, right? I think
Yeah.
that, some plays that have really influenced me. I keep going back to it, but it really stands true. I mean, I was really art artistically changed by The Language Archive by Julia Cho.
Hmm.
That play really put me on a trajectory. Rajiv Joseph's Gruesome Playground Injuries is a play that has really inspired me. He's my friend now, so now if he listens to
Oh,
this,
cool.
he's gonna feel cocky about it, but it's true. It's true. He inspired me before I even met him.
That's awesome.
Um, and then, of course, like, David Henry Hwang has had amazing pieces like Chinglish and Yellowface that have really moved me a great
Hmm.
deal. And then going older, there are pieces like Death of a Salesman, of course. Arthur Miller was really a big moment for me to read that and understand that. And um,
Yeah.
August Wilson's The Piano Lesson and Fences, and his work. His work was so inspiring because he was so dedicated to his community as a black man and a black playwright, and that
Hmm.
was really something that I latched onto, where I was like, look at this person who was so dedicated. He wrote this his biggest body of work was his, I think it's the Century Cycle, the Pittsburgh Cycle, which was
Hmm.
he all set in roughly around Pennsylvania, and he wrote 10 plays that was set in from 1900 to 2000, a different the black experience in each decade. He wrote 10
Wow.
plays,
Wow.
and
What was the name of that
and
again? That's
the Century Cycle.
the
It
Century
was
Cycle.
August
That sounds
Wilson,
fast. Hmm.
and it was just and he finished it. He finished it right before he passed away. He got sick, and he made sure to finish it before he passed away, and it's just remarkable. And like,
Yeah.
just like that dedication and the sort of like, both August Wilson and F. Scott Fitzgerald, both were like, there were two writers that I remember being like, they took a big swing
Hmm.
and they didn't hide it.
Hmm.
They were
Yeah.
like, this is
Yeah.
what I'm trying to do. F. Scott Fitzgerald was like, I'm trying to write books for my generation. And
Yeah.
and being that confident and wanting to be that ambitious, and also for the August Wilson part of it, wanting to sort of be a champion of the stories of your community. Those are things that have really, inspired me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you have a couple. Well, one that you wrote, which is the Writing Fragments Home, and then also you're going to be directing Hold These Truths.
Yeah.
Both these now, how do these speak to kind of like the current landscape with some of the appalling Asian hate, and even Viet Cong you're going to be doing too, right?
Yeah.
Coming up.
Yeah.
So talk about that, and even talk about a little bit. Talk about theater as giving voice to the Asian experience as well. But these, what's the importance and the timing of these particular works?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, as you had mentioned, although discrimination against the Asian American community has sort of been lurking before the
Mm,
pandemic, there's
yeah,
been a really striking and horrifying increase in this since COVID, since
yeah,
since COVID really came about, and then it had a peak in the Bay Area, specifically during Lunar New Year for whatever reason. And then, of course, there
Hmm.
were the murders in Atlanta that happened, which were so tragic.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so these pieces, you know, Writing Fragments Home is we're doing an online reading of this piece through TheatreWorks Silicon Valley with over 40 other theater organizations partnering with us, and that's a charity event to raise money for a group called Compassion in Oakland, who
Hmm.
mobilized really quickly and beautifully when near Lunar New Year, around that part of the calendar year, and and what they do is they have created a system where they have a group of volunteers and they provide chaperone services for the elderly Asian American community who were the victim of a lot of attacks,
Yeah.
both in Oakland, and then they've expanded to San Francisco, and now they're expanding down to the San Gabriel Valley in Southern California, where there's a large
Hmm.
Asian American population. So they're doing amazing, amazing, and beautiful work. And 100% of the ticket sales for that event will go towards that organization, which I'm really
Hmm.
proud of. And that piece, you know, as you said, it's about a young writer, loosely based off of myself, and a mother who is an immigrant. And for me, thinking about the fear that I feel for my elders right now,
Mm. Yeah.
you know, that play felt like it was gonna resonate and you know give voice. You know, it's about the loneliness that an immigrant feels in this country at times, and so I felt like it was a play that would both serve um, you know uplifting the story of a community while also being you know a charity event there. Hold These Truths is a piece about Gordon Hirabayashi, a true story of a
Yeah.
gentleman who refused to go to the internment camps during World War II.
Yeah. Incredible.
And he fought it, lost the fight, went to jail a couple of times, and then, you know, spoiler alert, in his old age, we found out that the U.S. government knew that they didn't need to intern these Japanese Americans or take them from their homes, and he
Mm.
eventually, 40 years after he originally started his fight, he won his court case in the Supreme Court. Um, and you know, for that piece, we're in the middle of rehearsals for that right now, and I was talking to our performer Jomar Tagatak about that, and we were like, you know, with any it's a solo show, it's a one person telling a story, and with any show like that where you're speaking directly to the audience, like the big question that you always have to ask is like, who are we talking to and why now?
Hmm.
And one of the things that we were talking about with that show, it's a story about a person who had to keep fighting and fighting and fighting for their principles and morals, and
Yeah.
they lost a few times, but they eventually win, right? And I'm like, we got to
Yeah.
remember he eventually wins this story.
Yeah.
And for me, we were thinking about, you know, there are so many people before, but even more so now, there are so many people that are, you know, fighting for their principles. They're out on the streets. They're
Yeah.
organizing. They're doing the work that they need to do for justice and for to sort of hold America to aspire towards the ideals that America should aspire towards. You know?
Yeah.
And we were talking about all of those people that we see doing that amazing work, and how many of them, for very good reason, are like, I am so tired.
Mm. Yeah.
And for us, we were like, you know, that's who we're talking to. That's why we're doing this play, and that's who we're talking to. For some people, you could do a play like this about the internment camps and about the story of this gentleman, this hero, and be like, oh, this is an educational piece. This is a piece to tell the story for people who don't know about the story or don't know enough about the story.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm kind of not interested in that right
Hmm.
now. I'm
Yeah.
like, you could learn about that. You could find that and learn about that. And I was like, I'm more interested in all of those people who are doing the work, the modern day version of that work, who are
Yeah.
fighting that fight, who are tired. I want to tell this story for them so they could enjoy themselves. I want them to feel
Hmm.
inspired, and I want them to get even just a little bit more energy to continue doing what they're doing. Because here's an
Yeah.
example of someone who did what they were doing back in the 40s, and he won. He did it.
Yeah. That's cool. That's such a
Um,
good way to approach something like that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it to see how that comes out. Kind of like
yeah,
encouraging those that are to continue to press on. That's
yeah.
cool. Alrighty. Well, lastly, what what is something that you have kind of like as your life mission or goal, or even something that drives you, keeps you focused along those
Mm.
lines? Like what really at the core of Jeffrey Lowe, what makes him tick?
Oh gosh, oh gosh. I really hope that I am able to help both people from marginalized communities feel seen in storytelling, be it theater, film, television, books, anything, you know. I want people from those communities to feel seen and feel welcome. So what
Hmm.
I mean by that is a lot of times we'll be able to put diverse stories on stage, but maybe the diversity doesn't match in the audience.
Yeah.
And for me, it's really important for me to be able to do both. I think that,
Hmm.
you know, my mom will be the first to tell you that, you know, I get distracted really easily. I get distracted really easily, and I can really meander in my motivation to do stuff. So she would joke around that I'm either so busy doing things nonstop, or I'm just sleeping in, playing video games, and doing nothing. Right? There's no in between for me.
Right. Right.
And when I was growing up, there's no in between. And so, you know, for me, finding storytelling really saved me in a lot of ways, because I
Hmm.
could find I think that, you know, I I I feel like I'm a hard worker, and I feel really proud of the work that I've been able to do this far in my life. And but also I think very easily there could have been a world where I was sort of aimless in my life.
Hmm. Hmm.
But because I found theater, because I found storytelling, because I found the arts, I was motivated. I was
Hmm.
motivated to do something and to create. And for me, I really hope that I can do work where other people who need representation, who it would really help uplift them in ways that'll propel them into whatever they want to do in life by seeing themselves on stage, or being on stage, or just knowing that that storytelling exists. I want to be able to make that more accessible and more common for everyone.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeffrey. It was great catching up with you, and I look forward to seeing you out in the theater.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, man.
Cool. Thank you. To find out more about Jeffrey, you can follow him on his Instagram. They call me JLo, and go to his website, jeffreywritesaplay.com. To find out more about TheatreWorks Silicon Valley, go to their website, theatreworks.org. Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Visit our website to become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the local creatives. This episode's music is Tang by Chris Inman, who is featured in issue 13.2. Follow him on Spotify at Chris Inman and on Instagram at chris.inman, as well as his record label, Orange Label Records.